Have you ever spoken something deeply personal, and the very moment the words left your mouth, you knew you had just lost something you could never get back? Not a private secret, not something shameful, but something extremely fragile within your soul, a dream that had not yet grown, a fear you had not yet named, an intuition that had just flickered and disappeared. We tend to believe that sharing will make us feel lighter, but in Machiavelli's psychology, there are things that the more you speak them aloud, the more you lose mastery over them. Machiavelli believed that the human soul has very deep layers where the most subtle movements take place in silence, and the things that occur in those deep layers, if told to the wrong person at the wrong time, will be distorted by their ego or by your own ego, weakened or even turned into a burden you never intended to carry. There are things you do not speak, not because you fear judgment, but because silence is how you protect the very process of your inner transformation. This does not teach you how to be silent toward the world. It comes to show you that there are 7 things, according to Machiavelli, which, if you know how to keep them to yourself, your life will change in ways so subtle yet so profound that you may never have imagined. If you are ready to enter the deepest layer of your inner world where even a single sentence can reshape an entire journey, then we will begin now. Number 1. Your deepest desires, where libido is moving toward. There is something very strange about the deepest desires of human beings. They never appear in noise. They arrive in moments when you are alone, when pressure retreats, and the mind becomes quiet enough to hear a very faint call from within. Many people have shared that they recognized their true dream in moments that seemed entirely ordinary. An afternoon watching sunlight through a window, an evening sitting quietly after a long day, or the sudden realization that they were living a life that was not truly theirs. Machiavelli called this impulse the direction of libido. Not libido in the trivial sense of physical desire, but as the life energy seeking a path toward what truly carries meaning. Machiavelli once wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." This energy is so delicate that exposing it too early can cause it to evaporate like mist in the wind. Machiavelli suggested that everything sacred in the psyche needs darkness in order to grow. Imagine a newly planted seed. If you constantly dig it up to check on it, to show others whether it has sprouted yet, you will unknowingly kill the very thing you are trying to nurture. Dreams are the same. Machiavelli believed that the deepest desires always test you at this point. They require the courage to remain silent with the world until you are strong enough to step forward. A single raised eyebrow, a careless remark can be enough to divert the flow of libido and cause you to abandon your path before it truly begins. This does not mean you are weak. It means that a true desire is like a delicate living being. It needs darkness, the warmth of patience and silence to find its shape. The things you speak too early no longer belong to you. They become conversations owned by others, placed under their judgment, comparisons, and doubts. Once a woman shared that she deeply wanted to open a small bakery. Every morning she woke early, tested new recipes, and documented each small failure. But the moment she mentioned to a colleague that she was considering leaving her job to pursue her dream, she was met with a wave of warnings. Business is not easy. Can you even support a family? You already have a stable job. Why dream like that? She said what made her hesitate was not the words themselves, but the sudden cooling of the energy inside her, as if a flame had been blown out. When she returned to her daily routine, she realized she had lost the most precious phase of her dream, the time when it was still a sacred secret belonging only to her. Machiavelli believed that your unconscious knows what aligns with your soul long before your rational mind does. But the unconscious does not speak in grand slogans. It speaks in subtle vibrations, gentle intuitions, sensations you cannot easily explain. Speaking too early allows language to interfere with that flow and distort it. Silence, on the other hand, gives you time to observe whether the desire truly belongs to you or is merely an echo of social pressure, family expectations, or constant comparison with others. Remember that not everyone is subtle enough to understand your dream, especially when you yourself are still trying to understand it. Some will project their fears onto you. Others will unconsciously impose their own limitations onto your path, and some speak purely out of habit, unaware that a single sentence can alter another person's destiny. Protecting your deepest desires is not selfishness. It is a responsibility to your own soul. You do not need to announce them, convince anyone, or seek approval. What matters is not that others understand you, but that you are patient enough to nurture your dream before offering it to the world. And that is precisely why the first thing you should not tell anyone is your deepest desires. They are the earliest stage of a birth, and every birth needs darkness in order to form. Number 2. The things you fear most because they are windows into the shadow. After safeguarding your deepest desires, there is another thing that deserves equal protection. The fears you have never dared to speak aloud, because sometimes what weakens you is not the fear itself, but the gaze and words of someone who lacks the depth to understand it. Fear is always the raw material of the shadow, the dark aspect. Machiavelli believed every person carries within. The issue is not whether you experience fear, but that telling it to the wrong person can turn it into a distorted mirror reflecting a form you are never ready to confront. Not everyone understands how the psyche works, and not everyone is capable of holding an exposed fear with care. Imagine holding a shard of broken glass in your hand. In the hands of someone who knows how to heal, they will gently help remove it. But in the hands of someone who does not understand, they may grasp it clumsily, and every careless pull can deepen the wound. Fear is the same. Placed in the wrong hands, it will not be healed, but twisted, magnified, and deformed. I once heard the story of a woman who constantly worried that she were not good enough at work. One day she opened up to a colleague, sharing that she feared making mistakes and being seen as incompetent. She believed speaking out would bring relief, but the opposite happened. Weeks later, in a meeting, she overheard that same colleague using her private confession to imply that she lacked confidence in her abilities. What had been a small fear, once only a whisper in her mind, became a shadow looming over her performance, shaping how others saw her and, worse, how she saw herself. When she reflected on it later, she said she did not blame the colleague. What hurt most was realizing she had handed a piece of her shadow to someone incapable of holding it. In the Machiavellian language, every fear is a doorway into the shadow, and not everyone can step through that doorway without harming you. The shadow contains what you have not yet dared to acknowledge. Unconscious aspects of the soul, and those who do not understand its nature can easily use your disclosures to wound you, often unintentionally. Machiavelli wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate." If you tell your fears to someone with shallow psychological awareness, they may respond with familiar phrases like, "It's nothing to worry about. Everyone feels that way. Don't be so weak." Or worse, use it against you when you least expect it. To them, your fear is merely information. To you, it is a delicate emotional balance, and every rough word can send you spiraling. The shadow operates through a particular mechanism. Anything touched incorrectly immediately grows larger. If someone strikes your fear with the wrong energy, the shadow amplifies it many times over. You become more anxious, more defensive, more self-doubting. This is not because you are weak, but because the shadow, like a dark room, reacts to every light cast upon it, even distorted light. Modern science refers to this as emotional amplification. When you speak of fear aloud, the brain registers it as significant. If the listener responds with negativity or insensitivity, your nervous system encodes the fear as a genuine threat, triggering a stronger stress response. A single ill-timed remark can provoke the amygdala, the brain's fear center, creating an anxiety loop far stronger than before. This is why Machiavelli emphasized that not everyone deserves access to your shadow. Fear needs understanding, not explanation through someone else's mindset. Therefore, the second thing you should not tell just anyone is your deepest fears, not because they must be hidden, but because they require a space safe enough for you to face them before exposing them to the world. If you are ready, we will move to the next part, where Machiavelli speaks of a form of pain, even more subtle than fear, unresolved psychological wounds, and why they should not be placed in the wrong hands. Some things in the soul do not need exposure, but understanding, not rushed advice, but a space safe enough to discover their own form. Number 3. Unprocessed psychological wounds because the ego will defend in the wrong direction. If fear makes you hesitate, there is something even more fragile. Something that can shape how you exist in the world without you realizing it. Unhealed wounds. This is the third thing that, according to Machiavelli, should not be shared carelessly. A psychological wound, when it first appears, often has no clear shape. It exists as an intersection of emotions, reactions, and internal signals you have not yet named. A single mistimed influence can entangle the experience further, making it more confusing and leaving you disoriented in your attempt to understand yourself. This is why Machiavelli believed that an experience not yet given meaning is easily distorted when told too soon. When you do not yet understand what is happening within you, you tell the story from a place of chaos. Machiavelli wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain, and when the listener lacks depth, they reflect that chaos back to you many times over." I once met a woman named Anna who had experienced a deep psychological shock after the end of a long-term relationship. In her vulnerability, she shared her story with a colleague hoping for relief. Instead of understanding, she received comments like, "You must have done something wrong. I think he just got tired of you. You are never compatible anyway." These words were not malicious, just shallow, but to a wound still raw, they became invisible knives. Later, she said the most painful part was not the breakup, but the label she felt stamped onto her, not good enough to be chosen, and it all began because she handed a wound that had not yet closed to someone unable to hold it with kindness. Machiavelli warned that the ego reacts defensively when a wound is touched before integration. A careless interpretation can transform an experience from something that happened to you into a negative story you begin to believe about who you are. From that point, you live inside a story you never wrote. Imagine a psychological wound as a page soaked with water. If you try to open it too early, the paper tears, the ink smears, and the page is lost. But if you allow it to dry slowly, it retains its form and reveals what it was meant to teach you. Psychological wounds require this same patience, a quiet period in which you understand yourself, the event, and its role in your growth. In Greek mythology, the god Hephaestus was thrown from Mount Olympus as a child, leaving him permanently injured. What matters is not the fall itself, but how he carried that pain. He did not lament or seek pity. He transformed his suffering into mastery, becoming the creator of the most exquisite artifacts of the gods. His story reminds us that the deepest wounds often find meaning only when held in silence long enough. Sometimes allowing pain to speak on its own is how you save it from distorted interpretations imposed by others. That is why Machiavelli said some wounds are not meant to be told but understood. Certain pains require you to sit with them, observe them, question them, and let them answer in their own language, not through someone else's explanation. When you speak too soon, you surrender the power to define the wound to the listener, who may reshape it into something entirely different from its truth. The third thing you should not tell just anyone is your unresolved wounds, not because they must be hidden, but because they are seeking a safe place to be seen accurately. They need calm, not judgment, understanding, not curiosity, time, not rushed advice. And when you become strong enough to touch that wound with your own hands, you will realize that silence is sometimes not avoidance but a form of self-love. Number 4. Your judgments of others because they may be projections. After touching your unhealed inner territories, have you ever wondered what appears when you turn that gaze outward and begin speaking about others, especially those who irritate you? Machiavelli believed that what you see in others is often not the truth about them, but an unconscious fragment you have not yet dared to face within yourself. This is why the fourth thing you should not casually share is your judgments of others. Machiavelli once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." When you grasp this, you realize that judgments, especially intense ones, rarely reflect the true nature of the person judged. They mirror what the ego is trying to conceal. When you complain about someone being controlling, there may be a part of you that longs for control but has not been acknowledged. When someone's loudness irritates you, it may reflect a suppressed desire within you to express yourself. And when you accuse others of selfishness, it may be because you have not allowed yourself to recognize your own needs. In therapy, I once heard a woman repeatedly complain about a male colleague she described as arrogant and always trying to dominate. She shared this with many people, seeking validation, yet those who listened sensed something was off. The colleague was actually kind, simply confident in presenting his ideas. In therapy, the therapist asked her one question: "What about his confidence bothers you?" She realized she had always wanted to speak up but feared rejection. His confidence mirrored what she lacked and longed for. Unable to face this, she unconsciously turned it into judgment. Her story shows that judging others is often the psyche's way of saying, "Look at yourself." Machiavelli described projection as one of the most subtle defense mechanisms of the psyche. When you cannot face an aspect of yourself, you push it outward onto someone else and believe the problem lies with them. In reality, the issue resides in your own unilluminated corner. Sharing harsh judgments about others not only exposes your psychological blind spots, but also distances you from the path of inner maturation Machiavelli called individuation. When you speak excessively about what you dislike in others, you reveal to the world what you have not yet accepted within yourself. And when listeners lack insight, they may use your own words to judge you, even if you never intended that. So whenever someone feels unbearable to you, ask what within them is asking you to confront something inside yourself. This is not an accusation, but an invitation. Even the strongest reactions carry unconscious messages, and sometimes silence is the only way to create enough distance to see what truly belongs to you and what is merely the shadow of the ego slipping outward. Silence here is not avoidance or denial of truth. It is a pause, a space to observe your own reaction before turning it into a narrative. Because once you convert fleeting emotion into speech, you risk not only harming others, but freezing the very truth you need to face. What within me was activated. That is why Machiavelli advised that judgments of others should not be shared carelessly. Not because you must pretend kindness, but because you must protect your inner space from distortion caused by your own shadow. When you become calm enough to listen to your reactions, you may discover that what irritates you most in others is often calling you toward growth. Number 5. Your most private intuitions, because they are the voice of the unconscious and synchronicity. After recognizing how judgments can reflect the shadow within yourself, there is something far more subtle that also needs to be kept in silence. Your most private intuitions. Have you ever noticed that there are things you know without being able to explain them? Sensations that arrive quickly, softly, yet carry an inexplicable weight. For Machiavelli, intuition is not a fleeting emotion or vague imagination. It is the voice of unconscious and is sometimes delivered through meaningful coincidences known as synchronicity. Machiavelli once said, "Intuition gives outlook and insight. It reveals possibilities." Intuition does not merely tell you what is happening. It opens a doorway to what could happen if you are still enough to listen. Intuition is a special form of perception. It does not pass through rational thought, yet it possesses a precision that can surprise you. Machiavelli believed that the unconscious holds information the conscious mind has not yet processed, and intuition is the bridge between these two worlds. And intuition often appears as a fleeting sensation, a sudden image, a small thought that refuses to leave you. But when you share that intuition with someone who has not experienced such awareness, they will immediately apply logic to dismiss it, or flatten the profound message the unconscious has just delivered. Intuition is much like a spark. If you protect it properly, it can become a guiding light. But if you blow on it with too many explanations, opinions, and doubts from others, that spark will go out before you understand what it was trying to tell you. Many people have experienced this. They feel a clear inner knowing, but the moment they share it, the intuition loses its brightness and fades until they begin to doubt themselves. This does not mean the intuition was wrong. It means it was exposed too early. I once heard the story of a man working in the investment field who had a strong intuition about a project he believed would fail. Even though all the numbers suggested great potential, he could not explain why. He simply felt that something was not right. Instead of observing further, he shared this feeling with a group of colleagues. They laughed, saying he was too sensitive and not driven. The pressure from those comments led him to ignore his intuition and proceed with the investment. Project failed exactly as he had sensed from the beginning. Later he said what he regretted most was not the financial loss, but the moment he lost trust in the quiet voice within himself. To better understand intuition, neuroscience offers an interesting perspective. Research by Professor Antonio Damasio shows that the brain processes unconscious information much faster than conscious thought, meaning we know something before we can name it. Intuition arises when the brain integrates data from experience, memory, and emotion, then sends it back as a sensation. When we share an intuition that has not yet fully formed, we drag it into the rational domain where it is easily dissected and misunderstood. An intuition needs you to stay with it, observe it, and acknowledge it rather than explain it immediately. When you sit in silence with your intuition, you allow it to grow and gradually reveal its true meaning. But when you rush to share it in search of validation, you unconsciously turn it into a topic for debate and lose the sacred quality it originally carried. Machiavelli believed intuition is one of the most important communication channels between consciousness and the unconscious, and that is precisely why it must be protected. Not everyone understands symbols. Not everyone recognizes synchronicity, and certainly not everyone is subtle enough to avoid breaking the wings of an intuition that is still learning to fly. Some will deny it, some will laugh, some will pull you back into their comfort zone, and intuition, like a thin streak of light across a twilight sky, can disappear with a single careless glance. Therefore, the fifth thing you should not casually tell anyone is your most private intuitions, not because they must be hidden, but because they require a quiet space in which to speak for themselves. Let these intuitions guide you for a while before allowing the world to step in. Because sometimes what ruins an intuition is not its inaccuracy, but your haste in handing it to those who cannot hear the language of the unconscious. Number 6. What you are trying to heal because the process of individuation requires privacy. At this point, Machiavelli leads you into a deeper layer. Once you have begun to hear the whisper of intuition and see how the unconscious touches your life, not only listening to these subtle signals, but learning to stand firmly in the parts of yourself that are in the process of healing. What you are trying to heal is often extremely fragile because it consists of parts of yourself you do not yet fully understand. It may be habits of self-devaluation, fear of abandonment, feelings of inadequacy, childhood wounds, or layers of defense you have built over many years. When you begin to work through them, you are not merely removing a layer of protection. You are stepping into the softest terrain of the soul. And as Machiavelli once said, one does not heal by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. For this reason, like freshly turned soil, any heavy step can damage the process. One viewer once shared her story of committing to heal, a deep sense of not being worthy of love after years of relationships that caused her to shrink herself. On that journey, she began learning to listen to her own needs, set boundaries, and allow herself to say no. But because she longed for validation, she shared every change with her friends. Some supported her, but others said things like, "You've changed too much. You're becoming selfish. Why are you suddenly so difficult? You used to be so gentle." Those small comments alone were enough to pull her back toward her old self, the very version she was trying to leave behind. Later, she said the hardest part was not learning to love herself, but holding on to the change while people attached to her old version kept dragging her back into the past. What slowed her journey most was sharing it too early and too broadly. Machiavelli emphasized that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But to become yourself, you need a space private enough to reconstruct your inner architecture without interference from others' expectations, opinions, or fixed images of who you are. When you share what you are trying to heal, listeners often unconsciously view you through their own lens, reflecting back their fears, limitations, and interpretations. And this is precisely what makes you unstable Because you are in the softest stage of transformation. Healing is like stitching together a torn piece of fabric. You cannot sew it while holding it up in the middle of a marketplace for everyone to comment on whether the stitches are straight. Every hand that touches it, every judgment, every expectation causes the thread to snap, forcing you to start over. Only when the fabric rests in a quiet place, held by your own hands, can it mend itself into the shape your soul truly needs. One of the clearest examples of the necessity of privacy in inner rebirth is the journey of singer Adele. After global success, she entered a marital crisis and faced deep issues of personal identity. But instead of publicly sharing her healing journey as many public figures do, Adele withdrew completely from the media for several years. She focused on therapy, physical training, emotional reconstruction, and rebuilding her relationship with herself. Only when she felt strong enough, clear enough, and grounded in her new sense of self did she return with the album 30, which she described as a healing letter to myself. By choosing silence throughout the process, her journey remained untouched by commentary, expectation, or external pressure, and that privacy allowed her to be reborn fully. What you are healing is not a better version of yourself to present to the world. It is a return to your most authentic self. The less your healing is observed, the greater its chance to develop correctly. Sharing too early makes you vulnerable to being pulled back into old comfort zones, influenced by judgment, or unconsciously reshaping yourself to meet others' expectations. When that happens, you are no longer healing. You are performing a version of being okay that others want to see. When you keep silence around your healing process, you are not alone. You are giving your soul a rare gift, the chance to grow without being pulled backward. And this is the greatest gift of individuation, becoming yourself in the deepest, most private, and most authentic way. Number 7. Moments of inner awakening because the self appears only when you are still enough. There is one kind of experience you must protect with particular care. Moments of inner awakening. For Michiavelli, these are not impulsive emotions or random thoughts. They are moments when the self appears and illuminates your life, precisely because of their sacred nature. They are the final thing you should share with anyone, as a single misinterpretation, a skeptical glance, or an ego-driven reaction from another person can distort or withdraw the message entirely. Machiavelli once said, "The self is our life's goal, for it is the completest expression of that fateful combination we call individuality." And because the self is this deepest center, every signal that comes from it must be protected by absolute stillness. Machiavelli believed that the self, the deepest center of the psyche, speaks only when you are sufficiently still, not externally still but internally still, when the noise of the ego softens, when anxieties stop pulling you forward, when you are truly present with yourself. For this reason, moments of inner awakening are extremely delicate. They cannot withstand rushed analysis, are not meant to be commented on by others, and must never be interpreted on your behalf. If you speak of them too soon, the ego of others intrudes, or your own ego immediately tries to explain, define, or rationalize, distorting the original message. When this happens, the self withdraws. Not because you are wrong, but because the moment was not held safely enough to continue unfolding. A woman named Linda once shared that on an ordinary morning while making coffee, she suddenly felt something very clear. She no longer wanted to live the life others expected of her, not because of pressure, but because she felt a deep inner call, as though something inside her had grown and could no longer fit within the old framework. But an hour later, when Linda shared this with her best friend, the response was, "You're overthinking again. Don't do anything impulsive. You'll feel fine after some sleep." Just a few such comments were enough for the subtle moment to vanish, leaving her doubting herself. She said what she regretted most was not slowing down, but allowing others to erase a message her heart had tried to deliver. Moments of inner awakening are like a sprout just emerging from the soil. They are fragile, easily knocked down by wind, easily crushed if exposed too soon. But if you keep them in silence, tend to them, observe them, and respect their natural pace, they can grow into something capable of transforming your entire life. Modern Machiavellian psychology holds that such moments are not random. They occur when the unconscious, conscious, and your unique soul temporarily align. It is when you see what you have never seen before or understand what was previously inaccessible. Because this alignment is rare and subtle, it can only survive if you keep it within without rushing to share, without seeking agreement, without letting the ego interfere. Moments of inner awakening are not meant to be discussed but lived, not to be validated by others but entered by you, not to seek advice but to ask yourself, where is this leading me? Machiavelli believed the self never sends signals merely to create fleeting emotion. It sends them to guide you toward the path that truly belongs to you. But to do so, you must be still and silent enough to hold the moment before allowing the world to touch it. And most importantly, moments of awakening do not happen many times in a lifetime. They are rare thresholds the soul opens for you to cross. If you do not stay with them long enough, if you allow the world to intrude too early, the door will close without warning. That is why the seventh thing you should not casually tell anyone is your moments of inner awakening. They are the language of the self, the turning points of individuation, the moments when you see yourself most clearly. Guard them as you would a candle in the wind. Shield it, protect it, and allow it to burn slowly. Only when you live fully with it, letting it guide you long enough, will you understand its true meaning, and then you will not need to tell anyone. Your life itself will speak. Having reached the end of the 7 things you should keep to yourself, you may now see an essential truth. The world is not always a safe place to lay down the most fragile parts of your soul, not because others are cruel, but because they cannot see with the eyes that only you possess. Unformed dreams, barely stirring fears, delicate intuitions, or moments of awakening all require time, stillness, and space for you to understand their meaning before the world touches them. In Machiavellian psychology, every movement of the soul begins in silence. Growth is not born from talking excessively about what you are experiencing, but from having the courage to observe your inner world without seeking witnesses. If you have ever wondered why Machiavelli believed silence could change a person's life, this is the answer. When you protect what is most sacred within, you protect the process of becoming who you were born to be. In this, we explore Machiavelli's profound insight into why certain parts of your inner world must be protected rather than shared. You'll learn the 7 things: desires, fears, intuitions, wounds, judgments, healing processes, and awakenings that lose their power when exposed too early. By applying these principles as daily inner habits, you begin to preserve your psychic energy, strengthen self-trust, and move through life with greater clarity and stability. These lessons help you stop seeking validation, recognize the voice of the unconscious, and allow authentic transformation to unfold without interference. Over time, you'll experience deeper confidence, sharper intuition, emotional independence, and a quiet sense of alignment where your life reflects who you truly are, not who you've tried to explain yourself to be.